welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast, where, unlike the film we're going to be discussing today, we've never been accused of style over substance. However, I am joined today by a leader of Lovable Rogues, John. John, how are you?
Very well. I don't know if I would class us as lovable rogues. Rogues, definitely. Lovable is pushing it kind of a wee bit. But, you know, it's all relative, really, isn't it? How are you?
Really good. Glad that we're back into the swing of things. We obviously had a wee break for a couple of weeks while we were out having a life, and now we're back doing this. And I'm definitely really excited to talk about this because I feel like this has been one of my most hyped films of the year that I really wanted to see. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Brilliant. Good stuff.
So the film we're going to be discussing today is Guy Ritchie's The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Gus March Phillips, I have a mission I want you to lead. What's the plan? To neutralize the German U-boats in the North Atlantic.
We're losing the war. Hitler is not playing by the rules, so neither are we.
We both know that I'm not very popular with the administration. The reason they find you unattractive is the very reason I find you attractive. If I'm to do this, I'll need my own team. You won't like them. They're all mad. They'll need to be.
This is based on the real Operation Postmaster, which saw a group of British recruits and one Swede sail around Nazi-occupied West Africa in a bid to sink the U-boat. Starring Henry Cavill as Gus March Phillips, Alan Ritchson as Anders Lassen, and Freddie Fox as Ian Fleming, the film delights in its real-life roots whilst adding more than a touch of glamour and violence to a World War II story. So, what were your first impressions of the film?
I went into the film with reasonably low expectations and sort of preconceptions of it, because with a Guy Ritchie film, you can't really tell one way or another how it's going to turn out. You know that it's not going to be, even if it's based on a serious subject and a real life subject, you know that it's not going to be a particularly serious film. Just by the title alone kind of gives it away, because like you just said just before we started recording, it's easy to get mixed up with other wordy titles, including Gentlemen and things like that, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and things like that, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I tripped over that a few times as well, just the same as you. But I had, as I said, little expectations about it, and I wasn't as disappointed as I thought I would be based on the previous Guy Ritchie film that I saw, which was Operation Fortune, which I was really looking forward to, and I was really disappointed by. It was very formulaic. But this one, it was an improvement on that, but it still wasn't a particularly wonderful film. It could have been a lot better.
Yeah, I think because I saw the trailer for this a while ago, and it has I think it's Another One Bites the Dust, and you've got Henry Cavill cracking jokes, and he's firing weapons left, right, and centre. I think I did have really high expectations for this, which didn't quite get met. But there were elements of it that I did enjoy. I think the big thing, obviously, with it being a Guy Ritchie film, is the action set pieces. I think were pretty impressive throughout. From the minute the kicks off, there is a sort of rather violent fist fight, including knives and all the rest of it, which starts in a small sailboat. Did the action sort of live up to the hype? Because I think the trailer does really bill it as quite a outlandish action film.
Yeah, the trailer does do that, but a trailer for any film is going to highlight these sort of elements to try and draw in the crowds. I think that the action did live up to expectations, because anything to do with the Second World War is going to have a certain amount of action, and the way that they pulled it off, it was in a very modern way. There was a lot of tongue-in-cheek elements to the action as well, because Henry Cavill just seemed to be smiling through all of the firefights that he was in and stuff like that, and just having a bit of a riot doing everything. So yes, in that sort of respect, it was good. And like you say, that's the kind of the anchor for a Guy Ritchie film of this sort. And if we get that right, then you're almost halfway there as far as the film's concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I was particularly impressed by Alan Ritchson You know, at one point he's got a bow and arrow taking Nazis out. At other points, I actually really like that sort of set piece where the alarm is going off on the boat. So there's like all these red flashing lights in the sound, and then he's just swinging an axe that he happens to have found. I thought I've never seen him in anything. Obviously, I'm aware that he's in Reacher, but I thought it was quite impressive that they'd actually managed to find someone who sort of physically outbuilt Henry Cavill, which I don't think I've ever seen before, but he just looked so huge. He was more than sort of capable, I think, in sort of taking on the role that he had. I was actually quite disappointed although Cavill was obviously having a good time, I didn't think he maybe had as much charisma as I'd hoped for, whereas I thought Alan Ritchson did a really, really good job.
Yeah, everything apart from his accent. His accent work wasn't particularly good. He did struggle to maintain what he thought was a Danish accent, which didn't actually sound much like a Danish accent at all. It was more veering southwards towards Netherlands more than anything else, I think. And when I came to terms with it, he would slightly change it. And he'd be almost heading across the Atlantic as well towards the sort of Native American his accent as well. So yeah, he did struggle with that. I don't think he's got a great capacity for that sort of thing. But yeah, he seemed to have an awful lot of fun doing that role. And the fact, like the way that they were all introduced as well. He introduced the whole crew that during the scene where he was being told about the mission and all that sort of stuff. So he introduced them and he said, like, he's what 100 different ways to kill a man, this kind of thing. So that kind of builds it up, and then you see him using basically everything to hand to kill people as well. So I thought, yeah, that was particularly well done. It was entertaining, and I know the business of killing in reality isn't entertaining, but this was so far away from reality as far as I was concerned, because it was very much a Boy's Own type story. It's almost like out of the pages of Commando comics, the way that the team was brought together and the way they talked and everything as well. So yes, it was detached from reality, even though it was based on reality.
Yeah, I think I was really chuckling. There's a line where I think it's Alex Pettyfer's character, and they find him and he's like got these like electric, like looks like something like something to start your car with attached to his nipples, and he's like, couldn't unplug my old sport battery's still running. Like It was really sort of jolly hockey sticks, which I don't think I was anticipating, because I don't know, I always imagine like all Guy Ritchie films are just Cockney and that's it. This was really sort of the other end of the scale, and I will agree with you, Alan Ritchson did veer into sort of Swedish chef territory every so often. But I thought that on the whole, the performances for me, I think I was surprised at how lacking I found Cavill, which I think was the biggest disappointment for me, because I just didn't think he was quite as charismatic as he could have been. But I think everything was so sort of, as you say, kind of like hyper stylized. It was so detached from like even like what they were wearing. Like he looked like he'd stepped out of like a contemporary Scandinavian sailing catalogue with his sort of cable knit sweater and all that sort of thing. It was so, that element I really enjoyed, because I thought the costuming, especially with like Isa Gonzalez as Marjorie, I mean, she looked flawless, like, gorgeous Hollywood waves, big red lip. Also, the thing that kind of stood out for me was Til Schweiger as the villain. So in my head, because he was in this film, I couldn't help but make comparisons to the likes of Inglourious Bastards, which unfortunately this film comes out sort of rather unfavourably in those comparisons. But what did you think of him as the sort of cream linen toting villain?
Yeah, it was quite a contained performance, I thought, from him, because it was all smouldering menace, and he didn't. Which
he was very good at.
Yes, he didn't need to do an awful lot in order to get across the fact that he was a total bastard, and he kind of did whatever had to be done. And you got that just through the way that he held himself and the way that he commanded the room anytime he came into it. It was quite an interesting way to do that. It wasn't like with the other characters in it, they were kind of over the top, like say Jolly Hockey Sticks. His was kind of more contained. It was almost like the German gentleman figure, but obviously with a level of menace to it, and you got an idea of Well, the very first time you see him, he's laughing, but you only see him from a distance, and you can see like a wee bit of blood on him and stuff as well. So you know that basically he's a bad man. He's not a good person at all. But it takes a wee while before you actually understand what he did in that scene as well. That doesn't happen right away, and it builds up the character. So there's always a wee bit of interest in the character and his role in it. Obviously, they're trying to distract him because he's the commander of the whole base. He's the German commander of the whole base, I should say, because there's Italians in there as well, isn't there? Or is it Turks? I can't remember.
Spanish, I think, as well.
So and they're basically like one of the guys saying, I'm in charge of the port, but obviously he's not because the Germans are there and they're in charge of the port. So I thought it was very well done. Like the fact that you didn't see him in uniform too often either. He was always dressed in a nice suit, which, the fact that it was Western Africa, so it would be hot and everything. So naturally they would be kind of dressed up. So you couldn't really tell at the beginning, was he a German officer? Was he SS? Was he Gestapo? So there was that whole thing as well. So you didn't really know. So there's a wee bit of mystery about him, stuff like that as well. Don't know. So what did you do along similar lines?
I don't know. I think because I'm really... I felt physically it was very impressive. Like, it's one of those things where when he was sort of doing the whole brooding thing, and as you say, he wasn't quite in uniform, so you were never quite sure of what was going on. I did really like that, but I thought some of the dialogue that he was given was a wee bit ropey.
Not just him.
Well, that's true. That is true. But I think for me, again, I think in my head, I get far too caught up in comparing this to Inglourious Basterds, because it did sort of feel like that when it opened. It was almost like Once Upon a Time in Nazi-occupied West Africa, and it had like the maps and, the sort of assembling a team and all that sort of thing. So I think this performance just felt a wee bit lacking compared to somebody like, the Hans Landa character, where there felt like there was definite threat. And although we do get a wee glimpse of who he is in a scene, which, as you say, sort of comes after this, introduction to him where he's got blood in his hands, quite literally, I never felt like the threat was very... I don't know, I just felt like there was lacking this sort of big build up of, I'm really scared of him, or he feels like, a loose cannon, or he's going to really... Like, at one point, he's obviously dressed as Caesar, and it just obviously kind of reduced him to a sort of comedy figure, which I understand is intentional, but I just felt the threat wasn't quite there for me. Sometimes, as I say, when he was just standing brooding, you did think, he does look dangerous, but then there was all these bizarre close-ups, like, for example, that scene where he meets Marjorie, and she offers him her lighter, and there's this big, zoom in, and you think, oh my God, something's going to happen. There must be a mark on her lighter that reveals who she is or something. And then he just wants to use his lighter. It felt really disconnected for me in a lot of parts. I don't know if it's just me.
No, you are right. There was a few elements outside of that as well where there was disconnects, because an example of that would be when they realise that there's more troops in the port than they anticipated, so they have to get help from, was it the Prince or something like that? The guy, and just before they're about to have that conversation, two of Cavill's teammates have a conversation, say, this isn't going to go well, I bet you £10 this isn't going to go well. And that whole element there turns out to be nothing as well, and you're thinking, well, why even include that? And there was a few bits and pieces where there were things brought up and you expected them to, really go somewhere to be used, and it just didn't. It just happened, and I don't know if that was just to fill up time or what, but it didn't seem to connect up. Like I say, there was a real disconnect with it as well. Yeah, in terms of the dialogue that he was given, that was right across the piece. There was an awful lot of dialogue that was really, really ropey in this film. Again, that's fair enough sometimes in these type of films, but it was quite apparent. It didn't detract from the action elements, because the action elements traditionally are not as wordy, but it was kind of noticeable. They could have done maybe another pass or two at the script, I think.
Yeah, because I noticed there was 4 writers on the script, and I did wonder if that was just a case of too many cooks. Because I think that, there's ways and means to adapt to sort of non-fiction historical text. You can go down the sort of very serious route, the sort of Spielbergian, route, or whatever you want to call it, or you can do something like this, which for me, I say from the offset from the trailer, it seems sort of like bombastic, silly, fun. But I just felt that it took a really long time to get to the point, and it was like all the fun had been contained in the trailer, and then it was sort of portioned out throughout the film.
Yeah.
So you didn't quite get this sort of lasting effect of, I'm really enjoying this. This is so over the top. The violence obviously is like hyper stylized, as we've said, and I think that is really well done. But for me, there was 3 sort of distinct kind of narratives that they were working towards. So you had the Brits back at home, which, Rory Kinnear doing a really bad Winston Churchill. That was,
yes, yeah, that was
good.
Particularly bad. Yes, yeah.
So you've got that story, and you've got Ian Fleming, who obviously Gus March Phillips, which is the Henry Cavill character, is allegedly the inspiration for James Bond. So you've got Ian Fleming back at home working with this sort of top secret crew. Then you've got Marjorie and Heron, who are out. They've travelled to West Africa separately. She's almost kind of got to seduce Til Schweiger's character, and then you've got on the boat. Now we've obviously said that there was some ropey dialogue and things like that for each sort of like section of the film, as it were. How do you feel they sort of wove together? Was there any parts that worked for you, didn't work for you? How do you feel that tonally this all sort of came together?
It did flow. It was slow at times, like you say. It could have done with being kind of sharpened up in certain elements. The stuff back in Britain, I don't know if there was. I can't decide whether there was too much of it or there was not enough of it. There was too much of Winston Churchill, because that just wasn't good at all. That was pretty poor. But the Carrie Ewell's stuff and Freddie Fox stuff was pretty good, and I like the fact that Freddie Fox was in a sympathetic role for a change, because he always plays a wee shit. He's always this
in fairness, he does have the face of a wee shit.
Yes, yeah. So it was nice to see that he was playing a wee shit that was actually doing some good for a change, because he did come across in that way, because obviously he was working with the Admiral and that. So yeah, that was that. All the British stuff was kind of, you knew exactly where it was going to go. You knew what was going to happen. You knew that there would be people trying to stop it, and everything, sort of the British establishment and all this sort of stuff, and jobs are on the line and careers are on the line and all this sort of thing. So yeah, it was okay, but it could have been a little more focused, because there was obviously an awful lot going on between the various areas, and some stuff was never really discussed or sort of pointed out to you in a way that you thought it would be, because there was like, at one point, there was like a 3-way communication going between West Africa, London, and the boat. So why didn't they just cut out London and just go straight to the boat and tell them there was problems, rather than this? And then suddenly they were, the boat and the mainland were talking directly to each other and all that again. You're thinking, but you're changing the rules about how this is all working and everything. So there was that was a wee bit off-putting, and it kind of drags you out, because you're going, no, that can't be right. That's not. But without knowing anything that actually happened at the time, the stuff actually at the port and everything was okay. One of the main problems for me was there was no real threat at all in this film. You knew what was going to happen. You knew when it was going to happen. You knew there would be hiccups and there would be stuff that would overcome it. And that's partly to do with the number of stories have been told in a similar way to this film, even though this is based in fact. And obviously some of these other films have taken inspiration from the real life events during the Second World War. I'm thinking like the Dirty Dozen and things like that, getting a band of ne'er-do-wells together, getting into enemy territory, doing a bit of damage, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a wee bit disjointed, I think, between the various elements of it, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely think for me the sort of scenes back in Britain didn't work, because I understood that obviously there were certain people who were against the plan, as it were. but I didn't really ever get the sense of that, they were like, oh, Winston Churchill would lose his job and all this sort of thing. But it never really amounted to anything because, again, it's obviously with it being based on fact, how this film was going to end, right? It's like watching Titanic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you kind of still expect there to be maybe some red herrings or some suspense or something thrown in there that's going to at least make it feel like you've worked to get to that ending, whereas this didn't really feel like it had that push. I kind of thought that when they had the scenes like with Marjorie and Heron travelling by train to get to the port, and they did the sort of like briefcase switcheroo with the Nazis and stuff like that, that was quite good because obviously they had to quickly go into a room and, take pictures and decode things. And I thought, well, that was quite well done because I quite like that sort of classic spy stuff where it is literally, you swap one briefcase for another sort of thing. And then obviously the general or whatever was like, stop, where are you going? And you thought they were going to get caught and all that sort of thing. So I do quite like that kind of traditional sort of spy stuff, but that kind of quickly petered out. And then you were sort of waiting on maybe Marjorie being discovered for who she was and things like that. But again, that sort of took its time to get to the point. And I just, I don't know, something was really lacking for me in this story. And, it's a 2-hour runtime, so it did have plenty of time to sort of get it shit together, really. And I don't think it ever, well, for me anyway, I don't think it did. And as I say, I think the film that we got was a lot more serious than what I was anticipating. I was thinking it was going to be this sort of big, silly, over the top. And there is elements of that, when they raid the prison camp to break out one of the team, and obviously they're tossing grenades everywhere and they walk in on Germans telling jokes and they join in and then they're blowing everybody up. Like there was elements of that, but it just didn't. And there was good one line. Like I like when he was saying about like the more, what was it, the badder they are, the more style they have and things like that. And he obviously really wanted a black leather coat and things. I don't know. It just didn't quite all tie together in the way that I thought it was going to. It was 3 very distinct stories that, albeit the characters were connected, but just tonally, they just didn't seem to land for me. And that does sort of bring me on to my next point. The film obviously is a slice of British history, but the film doesn't actually have a UK release date yet. Having now in the States, do you think that's a worrying sign? Are they looking at box office numbers across the pond and going, actually, that didn't do too well, and therefore it's not going to?
I think that may be part of it. It's obviously it was released in April in the US, and it quickly went on to streaming services, which is not really an indication of anything actually being wrong, but it didn't do particularly well at the box office. I think it made back its money, which is obviously the main thing, because it's not an expensive film to make, I don't think, in the grand scheme of things. There was a lot of practical effects in there in terms of like explosions. It looked as if they were actually blowing stuff up and things like that. So but it is concerning because with so many of Guy Ritchie's recent films, they've gone straight to a streaming service. Apart from the likes of Aladdin, which was done for Disney, but some of the other ones have had very limited runs in cinemas, or the last couple have been sort of straight, like Operation Fortune, for instance, was Amazon Prime. I just went directly onto that, and apparently it did very well in terms of the number of people that watched it. It was a good acquisition for them. So the audience is there for these type of films, and his particular take on genre films, because he does sort of spread himself over people look and say, oh, that's a Guy Ritchie film, but when you actually look at the various Guy Ritchie films, he does try and do different things, and they don't all have geezers in them, it's like this one, for example, doesn't really have anybody like that at all. The Brits are all obviously Oxford and Cambridge types right across the board, even the ones that are supposed to be even the Irish guy in it isn't really an Irish guy in it. It just doesn't. I know, and these people are real life people and everything, so it's just, it's a bit weird. It is a little bit concerning that it hasn't been given a sort of full release, considering that it has been trailed in cinemas here. I am almost certain that I have seen the Another One Bites the Dust trailer in the cinema here. So why is it not on the schedules? Because the longer it's out there and it's getting reviews from elsewhere, then it's going to have less of an impact. And it doesn't seem like a proper way to do things anymore, because everything gets released day and date right across the world. That seems to be the way of it now. And then they do their tour of, you know, various countries and publicise it and things like that as well. And that's another thing. I've not seen very much publicity for this film at all.
I do think it's a bizarre setup, and it does, for me, it sets a kind of slightly worrying precedent in the sense that, you know, was that almost like a sort of test run, and if it just hasn't performed, it will just get buried? Because actually, as I say, this was a film I was really looking forward to, so I would have wanted to have seen it in a cinema and, you know, to have had that experience. So I do think it's sort of bizarre that it's kind of disappeared, and I definitely have seen trailers for it in the cinema, and yet there's no like, oh, it's coming for a big summer blockbuster spot or anything like that. And I do wonder even if it's things like perhaps The Fall Guy maybe not performing as well, and maybe all of this thing's kind of having a sort of knock-on effect to what type of film actually gets released in cinemas these days.
Yeah, but it is a little bizarre given that the Gentleman TV show, which he was heavily involved in, obviously because it's based on this film, has been very, very successful. It's been top of the Netflix charts for a good couple of weeks, and it's been getting very good reviews and very good word of mouth as well. So you would think they would, you know, work their campaign off the back of that, from the mind of the man who gave us The Gentleman.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, so I don't quite understand it. It's maybe, like say, they don't have faith in the film and they're testing it out to see how they think it's going to go. But if you plonk that onto a streaming service, it's going to do very well because people will watch it.
Yeah, because I think the thing is as well, testing it in the States seems bizarre, as I say, because it's such a British story. And I think that it's quite obviously wrapped up in class, which is a very British thing as well. And, you know, as I say, the whole sort of Jolly Hockey Sticks thing, it's a very, very British story. So to me, it seems bizarre that the sort of testing ground for it has been across the pond, especially because I'm trying to think, is there any American names in it?
Just Carrie Yules, obviously he does a very good, is he? I don't know if he's American or Canadian, but he does a very good British accent. He's done a few of them in his career. So yes. But yes, there's not that many, apart from, no, I would say no, there's not that many sort of big name Americans in this. Yeah,
so again, so it seems like an odd choice that they've, as I say, they've used that as the testing ground. And I think you're right. I think, you know, as you say, using the whole from the mind of, you know, the man behind The Gentleman. I actually haven't seen that, Operation Fortune. I actually thought that was a cinematic release. I didn't realise that had gone straight to Prime.
Yeah.
But I think then, so Guy Ritchie's last few films have been that, King Arthur and Aladdin. How do you think this film sort of stacks up against them?
Well, actually, since 2017, well, he obviously had like a very sort of productive early career, like he did maybe 7 films in about 8 years, and then from like 2015, he did The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was a great film, didn't do well.
That is a great film. Yeah.
I know. I don't understand why it didn't do well, but anyway, then he did King Arthur in 2017, which again was okay. The giant snake wasn't a great addition to it, you know, at the end. So that wasn't, that was like, you know, Middle England geezers. That was a bit all over the place.
And David Beckham.
yeah, very much David Beckham. But like I say, from 2019, he's done 5 films since 2019, which is a pretty decent return.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, because he had Aladdin and The Gentleman in 2019, he had Operation Fortune in 2023, The Wrath of Man in 2021. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh,
I've never heard of that.
Wrath of Man is brilliant. It's really good. It's a very... It's Jason Statham, isn't it?
Oh,
it's about a guy who goes to work for an armoured car company as a new employee, and they've been getting robbed and stuff like that. And it's an excellent movie. The soundtrack is phenomenal. It's such a good movie. Yeah. I
don't know how I've never heard of that.
It came out during the pandemic, and it went.
Maybe
I think it's on Netflix. I may be wrong, but I think it is on Netflix, and that's a very good film. There's a number of people in that. There's some very good performances, and there's no comedic light elements in that at all. It's very hard and it's very serious and lots of action in it, and it's really, really good film. And obviously then you've got Operation Fortune, like I said, The Covenant, which again was another straight down the line serious film, which went straight to Amazon. And now you've got Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. So his output has been fast. You know,
Huge.
you're talking about 5 films in 5 years is no mean feat when it takes normally 2 years for a film to go start to finish. So he's kind of doing like a wee bit of a Ridley Scott here. He's always got something on the go. So when he's finishing something, he's moving on to something else. And obviously the fact that he's able to finance these films means that people have faith in him. And it must mean that his films are making a wee bit of money at least. Not massive amounts of money. Obviously Aladdin, that's slightly different. That's Disney, you know, and that's always going to be different. But the other ones, which are smaller action films, he's, you know, built up this reputation that you can get things done quickly. I mean, looking ahead, he's got like another 3 films on the go over the next year or 2. So it's just, you know, pretty crazy, his output. So yeah, he's doing the work. It may suffer. That's one of the problems with doing things so quickly. You don't spend as much time crafting. You don't spend as much time in the editing suite. Sort of finding the story sometimes you need to in the editing suite. But having said that, if you're, you know, the output's there and there's minor complaints from the likes of us, if people are still, you know, watching it, then, you know, that's all it counts as far as Hollywood is concerned. You know, it's all about the numbers. It's all about money.
Oh, absolutely. I think actually just having heard you list all those films there, I think it sort of changes the concept of, because to me, when I think of like a Guy Ritchie film, you do sort of contemporary times, you would think of something more like The Gentleman, because it is that sort of geezery gangster way. But actually, when you listen to what he's, you know, even just in the last 5 years, it almost makes you wonder, is there such a thing as a Guy Ritchie film anymore? Because how do you go from something like Aladdin to The Gentleman to even something like this that we're discussing? I didn't realise that he was quite so diverse in what he's tackling, really.
Yeah, well, the Gentleman is a good case in point, because that's almost a bridge between the geezer stuff and the toff stuff as well, because The Gentleman has all of those elements in there, all the people with the Cockney names and all this sort of stuff. So, and obviously the upper English class people who run the estate and all that sort of stuff. So that when we were actually watching it, Leslie said to me, Henry Cavill's doing the same accent as the guy from The Gentleman, the posh English accent, and it's not that far away from it, to be perfectly honest. It is very, very close. So yeah, there are commonalities, you can see bridges, but yes, his range of work is surprisingly diverse based on
I think that's definitely quite a big surprise. Even just, as I say, in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, I was expecting sort of geezers with guns, but it was all very like being an old sport and all that sort of thing. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on with regards to the film?
I was doing a wee bit of research for it this morning, and I didn't actually realise that Henry Golding was in the film. It was
Freddie Frogman, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Obviously, it was such a minor role in it, and I thought that's such a waste, because he is a leading man in so many films now. And it was interesting the fact that you had 2 possible James Bond contenders in the same film, about the origins of, you know, James Bond, obviously, as well. So that was kind of an interesting way to look at it. What did you think that it was it entertaining enough to get past its flaws for you?
I hate to say this, but no. See, for me, this felt like a long 2 hours, and I have sat through, as you all know, an enormous amount of stuff, and war films are very much my thing. And I think because I was so looking forward to this, as I say, you know, the trailer really sold me on it. And then once I settled down into it, I was like, there was a couple of lines that made me laugh. As I say, I really like the whole thing about Richie Pine unplugging the battery while he's like bleeding through his shirt. And I really liked some of the Alan Ritchson action scenes. I thought he was excellent in it.
Yeah.
But there was just too much that felt like slog, and the dialogue was quite bad for me to go, yeah, do you know what? Overall, I kind of enjoyed that. There was 1 or 2 pockets where I thought, oh, I'm hopeful this is going to get better. And it just never really, as I say, it just couldn't get its shit together for me. I think that I was actually disappointed in it.
Yeah. I was slightly more taken with it because
Right.
it was enjoyable in parts, and I did have quite a good time with it. It is almost a park your brain at the door kind of film, which it shouldn't be for something that obviously had an impact on the Second World War. We haven't actually touched on why they were actually doing what they were doing. It was to try and neuter the U-boat fleet, which were ruling the seas at that time, and they were stopping supplies getting between America and the Allies in Britain. So there was all sorts of problems with that, and it was a way to bring America into the war as well. So it was done for a reason, and it had been kept secret up until, was it 2006 or something like that, because the papers had only just been released under the sort of limitations on secrecy laws, which so it's at the moment it's quite a fertile time for all of these stories coming out because a lot of information is being released, and I think in a way we're almost starting to get a bit of malaise about these daring do war stories, because everyone has been put across as being, well, this is the action that turned the tide of the Second World War. Now the number of different actions that have turned the tide in the Second World War is amazing, because the tide must have been going back and forward like nobody's business. It's just incredible, because there was he's the author of this book is this film is based on. Damien Lewis has got a new book out, which is SAS Heroes 3. So it's like another book of stuff that they did that turned the tide of the war, you know. So, so you have to kind of take that into context as well, that it was one small part of a bigger operation. Now, whether they actually got that across, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. Some of the disconnects, like we've discussed, did pull me out of it. There was one major one which we haven't talked about at all, because they have to stop off in, is it Palma? I think they said.
Yes.
Yeah, in order to pick up their chum who's been arrested, nipple clamps, well, you know, the whole 9 yards there. And then they've got 15 days to get to the port, and then they find out they don't have 15 days to get to the port. And the 15 days are going to be taken up basically sailing more out to sea and away from the British fleet and away from the German fleet and the U-boats and stuff like that. And then they say, oh no, you need to be there in 12 days. And they have this big discussion, say, well, we just need to take the shorter route then, even though it's more dangerous. And then it just cuts to 12 days later. You go, what? Where was the danger? What happened? You know, did they just get through it? Okay, you know, there was this build up to this. It was always in the background, you know, dangerous waters, you know, anything could happen. You could get sunk at any time. They meet one boat, which they managed to sink, and then that's it. There's nothing else after that, and that's right at the start. That's before they even get into the Nazi infested waters. So yeah, and that was something else.
I mean, about lack of threat. Like, as you say, like you were anticipating this big build-up where they were going to have to almost sort of duck and dodge this tiny little sailboat through these massive big German warships, and you don't actually see any of that. They just arrive. It's insane.
And there's things like at one point they're trying to distract all of the Germans and all of the Axis people who are there. So they say, well, we'll put on a big party, and then we'll put on a smaller party for all the regular soldiers, and put on the big party. And of course, the woman has to go up and sing and entertain them in order to keep them. And it's just, and then they don't even show singing because it's overdubbed with a modern version of Jack. Is it Jack Knife?
Mac the Knife,
Mac the Knife, sorry, yeah. So, and I can't take that seriously, because there are war films out there like Escape to Athena, where Stephanie Powers gets up in front of all the Germans in order to distract them, singing a song going a hooey, and all this sort of thing. So it's you've kind of seen it all before, and even though this is based on the actual events that happened, then it's been parodied to a certain extent. So you're kind of going, well, no, I really don't get this at all. It's but
I almost think that that's the thing. Like, if the film had sort of leaned into that, which is, and I keep going back to the trailer, but the trailer almost sort of alludes to the fact that it is this sort of kind of ridiculous version of events. So I feel like if they'd leaned into that, it would have worked. But because, you know, the bits back in Britain and all that sort of thing, they were very, very serious, that it didn't quite ever sort of find its tone. Whereas if it had just sort of leaned into the ridiculousness of it all and how, you know, dangerous this was, I felt like it would have been a better film. But instead we just got kind of cliched versions of events, I think.
Yeah, and only one of the team got injured, despite the fact that they were up against. And that's a bit of a bugbear of mine, the fact that people get shot in the shoulder all the time and they just go, tis but a scratch, will be fine, and just put like a sling on and they're okay. But I'd read something about like getting shot in the shoulder, and it basically is a death sentence because it hits your lungs. Yeah, because it's like close to your lungs and everything, and it's like a major part of your body. It's not like, you know, they say, like in some films that people get shot and they say, yeah, I just shot you there, you know, but it was in the back of the leg, so it was just a fleshy part, so you'll be totally fine, you know. All this sort of, there's no major organs, but see if you get shot like in the shoulder and up the chest, there's all sorts of internal bleeding, and you can drown in blood and all this sort of stuff. It's not just, oh damn, you know, got a wee scratch here, you know, patch it up, John, you know. Oh, there we go, yeah.
I am honestly fully aware that Hollywood takes a lot of artistic license, but I have genuinely believed for so long, because of films, that you can get shot in the shoulder and walk it off.
Yeah, no. Well, I think you can get shot in like sort of upper arm, but see, when you're actually getting shot in this sort of area, then that's really, really serious. It's not
according to the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Yeah, and a number of other films as well. Yeah, there's been a few that do exactly the same thing. But yes, but that kind of knowledge doesn't help when you're just trying to enjoy a film, I suppose. You know, you kind of just kind of park that. And I'm at an age now where I forget most things anyway, so that's quite good, because I can forget stuff like that quite easily. So, I take it you wouldn't recommend this?
Oh, and I feel like it's been so long on this podcast since I've actually said, do not watch this film. And I think that it does have redeeming qualities, but just not enough for me to go out of my way to go, oh my God, you must see this. It's so funny. It's so this, it's so that. I just didn't really enjoy it overall. And actually, as I say, that was the biggest disappointment for me, because when we said we were going to discuss this, I was really excited, couldn't wait. And then just kind of got to the end, I was like, oh, I don't think I like that. So I'm going to say it's a no from me. What about you?
I would recommend it. I wouldn't recommend spending hard money going to see it at the cinema. I'd wait till it comes onto a streaming service and watch it there. It's kind of a good film to do that, and I think you would probably get enough from it if you know what you're actually going to be getting, what's expected of the film. And if very little is expected of the film, then you will get something for it. You will enjoy it, but don't go in expecting it to be a thorough recreation of a major Second World War event. You will come away disappointed from it in that case.
Yeah, and as we've discussed, also don't go into it thinking that what you see on screen is anywhere near what the real people look like, judging by the photos on the end credits. They've been very, very generous to some very brave people, which I've got no doubt about, but they've been aesthetically enhanced, I think is the correct phrase. Yeah,
there has been a certain amount of liberties taken. I think the moustache is the most authentic thing that bridges real life and the fiction of the film. Yeah.
So that is the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Obviously, at the time of recording, unfortunately, it doesn't have a UK release date, but I think it may find its home on a screening service at some point soon. What we did want to talk about, though, is other war films that we have watched and enjoyed that we would like to recommend to you, our listener. So, John, what is your first recommendation of a good war film to settle down and watch?
My first recommendation is the 1943 film The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which is a Powell and Pressburger film, obviously done during their Purple Patch. It's a war film in that it covers the actions of people during 3 periods of war. The Boer War, the Second Boer War, the First World War, and the Second World War. It's the title comes from a comic strip which was popular back in the 1930s called Colonel Blimp, which was this fat, balding colonel, army colonel, who's completely out of touch and he's got a big moustache. And when the film opens, you see the character of Clive Candy, who is this fat, balding man with a big moustache, and he's in this Turkish bath just prior to an army exercise starting. And what happens is that they are surprised by the enemy force in this exercise. They rush into the Turkish bath and basically take control of all the major players on the other side. And Candy complains that this isn't the way it's done. Wars start at midnight, and this is like about 9:30 at night. So from that, you get the idea that he's this old fuddy-duddy guy. But what it does then is it immediately goes into a flashback to the Boer War, where he's this young, dashing officer, and he gets involved in it's like a diplomatic incident with Germans in Berlin, and he basically insults the Germans and has to do a duel with an officer from the German side based on, I think they draw lots from it. And the one that is chosen is a guy called Anton Walbrook, a very famous actor of the time. And they carry out a duel. And the beauty of that is you do not see the duel. As soon as the duel starts, the camera pans away up to the ceiling and outside of the building and beyond. So you never actually see them fighting, but you see the aftermath of them as in that they're both pretty heavily beaten up and they're injured and they're both in hospital. And while they're in hospital, they form this bond of friendship. And also there's another character of Edith, who's played by Deborah Carr, who had put Candy onto like this incident in Berlin at the time as well. So, and they both fall in love with her, and she eventually goes with the Anton Walbrook character rather than the Roger Livesey character. So, and then this sort of friendship goes on, and obviously it's during the First World War, and they're all involved in that. But Edith has like died and things like this, and it's basically the friendship between two people on opposite sides of a divide during different wars over 3 periods, and it works beautifully because it's about the people that's involved in it. The German character is a very sympathetic character, like in a number of the Powell and Pressburger films. There's obviously Nazis are bad, but Germans are actually pretty good. They're decent people. There's reasons why things like that happen. There was a piece in the Second World War element where Anton Walbrook's children ostracize him because they become Nazis and he doesn't agree with it. He actually goes over and helps the Allies and stuff. And it's just this beautiful film about people in a time of war and how they actually interact with each other, and how like it's not as cut and dried as, good guys and bad guys. There's so many grey areas, and obviously there's a big love story in there. Deborah Carr plays 3 different people during the film as well, so it's just beautifully done. And it's obviously, it looks like a Powell and Pressburger film in colour. It's all this lush colours and everything, and there's a slight disconnect from reality in certain points of it as well, and it's really long. Although I was reading that the film wasn't particularly well received by critics or the government at the time because of the sympathetic nature of the German in it, and it wasn't released in the United States until after the war. And then when it was broadcast later, it was cut down. I mean, this is a film, it's about 160 minutes, and they cut it down to 90 minutes at one point, and it was restored in the 80s, and then there was the Martin Scorsese led restoration, brought it all together again. Obviously, he did that for a few of their films. It was a massive success. It was like the 3rd biggest film. I think it was like behind Casablanca and one other film that year at the box office in the UK, but it wasn't regarded as being a particularly patriotic film, which is kind of something that Powell and Pressburger had to fight against several times in their career for obviously I'm thinking of A Matter of Life and Death as well, which wasn't the all-out war film, propaganda film that they basically were asked to produce. But yes, it's a fantastic film. It's one that I had only seen for the first time about 10 years ago, and I'd always heard about it, and I always thought, I don't know if I want to watch a film about the Boer War and the First World War and a love story. Oh my God. Oof. But then when I watched it, I just totally fell in love with it. It's just such a good movie.
Oh, it's one of these films that I've always meant to get round to actually watching and I never have. And I didn't really realise it was sort of divided up into all those different parts. I'll move it further up the watch list, I promise, because this is like literally my territory.
Yeah, I think it may still be on iPlayer because it was on relatively recently on BBC, and I don't know, it just depends on what their licensing is. Sometimes it's only a month their film, sometimes I have them for longer, so you may be able to catch it on there if it's on there.
It's definitely worth having a wee look just to double check. For myself, I thought since we've done Operation Postmaster with Ian Fleming in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, I would go for Operation Mincemeat, which also featured a young Ian Fleming. So it's a 2021 film directed by John Madden. It's got an embarrassment of British riches, as it were, in the cast. You've got Colin Firth, Matthew McFadden, Kelly MacDonald, Simon Russell Beale, Jason Isaacs. And this sort of tells the story of, in a much more serious way, of Operation Mincemeat, which was a scheme cooked up whereby the British Intelligence Service decided to float a corpse out to sea dressed as a British serviceman. And they sort of gave him fake papers to make it look like the British were going to invade somewhere where indeed they weren't, in the hope that the Nazis would pick up the corpse, pick up the papers, and act accordingly. So I really liked this film. I thought it was really well acted. I thought it did have genuine moments of tension. And even though, again, you knew how this was all going to end, I did think it sort of built up the sort of threat level really well, because you really weren't quite sure how things were going to go, and could they even get a corpse in the first place, a credible looking corpse, which was such a ridiculous thing, but it made complete sense to the story. I thought it was acted really well. I think that Colin Firth and Matthew McFadden are excellent in it. I think that there's this sort of, these men obviously go way back in terms of their service together, but actually they're kind of competing against each other as well in terms of, there's a bit of a love triangle sort of element to it as well, but also they're both wanting to advance their careers, and who wouldn't want to be, as we said, the man who turns around the fortunes of the British in the Second World War. It's obviously a lot more serious than the film we've discussed today, but I do think it's definitely worth the watch. I think that it's one of these films where it totally flew under the radar when it came out. I think people just thought it was a kind of bog standard British drama, but actually there's really good sort of historical elements to it that are done really well. And also it is quite cool to see Johnny Flynn as Ian Fleming, because you are sort of doing that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where you're like, oh, he totally got an idea from this part of Bond, from this part, this mission or whatever. Yeah. So I do really like it. And as I say, the cast is excellent. I believe randomly it's been turned into a West End musical.
It has, yes.
Seems bizarre. But if you're looking for like a sort of straightforward, well-acted sort of classic British drama where it is essentially posh boys, turning around the fortunes of the British in World War II, this is a really good contemporary example, I think, of that. It's, as I say, it's just really well-acted, and I think that Matthew McFadden is in particular quite brilliant in this.
Yeah, I have read the book of this, which considering the story of it, you would think it would be quite a slim volume. I think it's about 300 pages or something, 350 pages, and it's a really good book. Yes, and obviously seen the film, and I have seen the West End musical of it as well.
Have you?
I did.
Oh
yes.
my god! So
not in London,
riddle me this. Yeah. What are the songs like?
They're really good, actually. It's very light-hearted. It's a comedy musical, and there are only 5 people in the production, and they do all of the various roles, and it's really well done. It's actually a cracking show. It was in like quite a small theatre, and we'd heard about it through, I think it was ETG, and we were looking for something. We were down in London for one day, I think it was, and we were travelling on from there. We were looking for something to do, and this had just started, and it was like the first week of its run, and It was hilarious. It was really, really good. It's very cleverly done as well, the way that they do all the various elements of it, because they're all playing like multiple roles. Soldiers, and I think there's even obviously one of them plays a dead body at one point as well. So there's quite a lot to it, but it's excellent, and it won loads of awards as well at the West End Awards just the turn of the year, I think, and it keeps getting extended. Its runs extended. At some point, it will tour, and I would suggest going to see it because it is good fun.
Although I'm surprised it's a sort of upbeat comedy thing, just because the film is that classic serious grey British drama. That's so strange.
No, it works really well in that regard. But yes, the film, you're right, the film was very well done. It was a cracking film, and for something that you know how it's going to work out, there was loads of tension. And I mean, that's a trick that you don't often see in films. They create tension from real life events. So you can probably count in your hand how many times you've seen films that do it effectively. And I'm thinking like Apollo 13, Oppenheimer, for instance. That was a really tense film, even though you know the bomb goes off, you know. So
yeah. I just think it's one of these things that it kind of it almost sort of, I think maybe poor release time maybe or something. I can't quite work it out, but I do feel like hardly anyone had been to see it. I don't think it performed particularly well, and it probably was just sort of seen as another sort of British sort of BBC type drama. But actually, I do think it is a lot better than that.
No, definitely. No, you're right. It's been on, I think it's on Netflix, and it's been on there for ages. So I think it's, open for anybody who actually wants to go and see it. And I'd recommend going and seeing that. Yes, it's definitely worthwhile. Yeah, smashing. And the fact that Johnny Flynn's in it, and that's who I thought was going to be the next James Bond. And by playing Ian Fleming, I'd kind of an inkling that they were obviously going to go for a younger one. I know they haven't officially announced it, although there's been lots of chat about it. But I thought he would make a very good sort of youngish James Bond character, because he's not like, I mean, Henry Cavill's very built and big, whereas Johnny Flynn is a slight character. He's not as bulked up or anything, but there's obviously the opportunity to do that as they go along. And I thought, he would be, and he's a very, very good actor as well. He can turn his hand to, and he's
probably the right age, which is quite crucial, I imagine, for casting this more than anything else. It's almost like who's got maybe 10, 15 years in them, as opposed to who looks the part, kind of.
Yeah, I think Henry Cavill's at sort of the edge of that now. He may be good for like maybe 3 films, because it takes such long. You're talking about at least a decade for 3 movies. So would you want that? I don't know. Okay.
So your next pick?
My next pick is a submarine drama called Run Silent, Run Deep from 1958. It stars Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster. I had seen this years and years ago, and it was on over, I think it was Christmas there again, and I recorded it.
Very festive.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's, like I say, a submarine drama. The Clark Gable character is a submarine commander who encounters a Japanese destroyer and comes out the worse for it. And this traumatizes him and basically puts him out of action for a year. At the same time, Burt Lancaster is the executive officer, the XO, on another submarine whose commander is moving on, and it's fully expected that he is going to take over as a captain of the ship. He's got the support of all his officers and the crew as well. They're quite a tight-knit unit. They work very well together, but the Clark Gable character puts in a request to Naval Command to take command of this submarine and go back into active service. What none of them realise is that he's basically been traumatized for the past year because he lost loads of his crew in this encounter with the Japanese destroyer, and he is a haunted man. So there are elements of this that are quite like Moby Dick, and there are also some elements that are quite like Mutiny and the Bounty as well, because when he comes on, he basically rules with a rod of iron. He puts them through all sorts of like mad drills in order to get their timings really tight for doing certain operations, and they don't know why they're doing it. He starts countermanding orders that are coming from Naval Command, and it becomes obvious that he's going after this Japanese destroyer again at the potential cost to another crew, and it becomes more and more volatile. And as he sort of has this sort of almost manic obsession with it, he's totally disconnected from his crew. He can't work with them. They are on the point of rebelling against him, and they want to put the XO, the Burt Lancaster character, in charge as well. And he's obviously stuck in the middle because he's bound by duty, but he's also has to take into consideration his place within the structure, his morals and everything as well, his honor, his loyalty to both his command and also to his crew, and how all that works out. And it's just this, and obviously this is all set in a submarine, and it does it really well because like everybody in the submarine is grubby and sweaty, and because you're obviously working at close quarters and there's not a lot of air circulating and stuff, so everybody's all hot and sweaty, and it just adds to the tension, the fact that they're all sort of crammed together. And it's just this absolutely brilliant film. And obviously with the likes of Burt Lancaster and Clark Gable and the two leads, the way that they play off each other is just fantastic. Such a good movie. And I mean, this is in black and white as well. I mean, it's quite late on, 1958, but the black and white adds to it as well. And just, it's an absolutely wonderful film. And it sort of gives a different aspect of a war film because it's all contained within the submarine. There's very few elements outside of it. At the start, yes, maybe there's stuff set in Hawaii, sort of Naval Command area, but most of the time it's just this group of guys actually in a submarine. So, and you can see how that type of film has informed other films like Crimson Tide, and I was going to say Crimson Peak, that's Del Toro film, which is got no submarines in it at all. But a lot of films that came, and TV stuff that came after it that included submarines, you can see that they've taken the elements of it to do with the claustrophobia and how people react and how the tension can actually get to you. So yeah, so smashing wee movie.
That sounds brilliant, I have to say. So two obviously very like kind of hyper masculine stars,
yes,
as well. In a war film, which you can see how that would absolutely work. And yeah, submarines. The thought of that actually terrifies me. Just that being so far beneath the the surface, and as you say, the sort of the claustrophobia and sort of working sort of on top of each other and how that could lead to tensions. That sounds absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it was one of the first ones I thought of when discussed this. Obviously, we have talked about war films in the past because we reviewed 1917.
Once or twice.
Yeah, but specifically we've come up with sort of top 3 war films before, so I was conscious of the fact I was going to choose something different. First of all, I had to remember what I actually chose the last time as well. So yes, that's good. So your third choice?
So my next choice is going to be the 1997 film Life is Beautiful. So what I love about this film is Roberto Benigni. I mean, he's a stand-up comedian who decided to take on a subject as grim as the Holocaust, and it absolutely works. So he plays a Jewish waiter who falls in love with a primary school teacher, and they go on to get married and have a child. But obviously the advent of World War II means that him and his wife are separated, and him and his son end up in a concentration camp together. And in order to protect his son, but I also think in some ways to sort of protect his own sanity, is he creates a game. So he tells his son that in order to win the game, they just have to sort of be kind of last men standing in the camp. And when you see him, he's getting the roll call in the morning and he's sort of winking and making silly faces to his son, but telling him to hide and be quiet. If we talk about threat level, you have this absolutely gorgeous wee boy in this film who you just want to wrap your arms around and make sure that he's okay. I think Benigni, he won the Best Actor Oscar for this, I'm pretty certain, so he helped write the script as well. I think it's a very unusual take on on war, because there is a lot of elements that do make you laugh as well, because obviously he is doing this sort of clowning around, and there's this lovely, you know, prior to them getting taken into the camp, there's this beautiful love story between him and his wife. I'm thinking in particular the night they go to the opera, and just, oh, it's gorgeous. But I think it's just a really unusual and different take on what it took to survive, because obviously a lot of war films, particularly ones that are set in concentration camps, are extremely grim and extremely, you know, fraught with danger. And whilst there is this element of, you know, he's playing this game with his son, and his son is sort of keeping him going in the same way that he's staying alive for his son. There is some really tense scenes where, you know, he accidentally ends up sort of inside the camp officer's house, and he's somehow serving dinner, and his son is at the table, and he's absolutely desperate for his son not to recognize them or give them away in any way, shape, or form. And you are, you know, watching through your fingers at that. It's so unbelievably tense, and it's just, there's moments of real beauty. As I say, there's a gorgeous love story, and it sort of ticks all the boxes in terms of, you know, there's threat, there's trauma, there's lots of sad bits, but there's also just this really human level where you're actually getting to see somebody's attempts at surviving, I guess, and what it takes to survive a situation like that. I think it might actually be one of my favourite films of all time, just because of the way it tells the story. I think his performance is absolutely incredible, because he's doing these sort of almost like Dick Van Dyke levels of physical comedy in a situation that you just think, how is this working? Like, it doesn't belong here, and yet it does work. I think it's just it's a really good film. Also one, if you're needing a good greet, it's definitely definitely one to seek out. If you just feel like you need to get a few tears out your system, this is definitely one to sit down and watch.
Yeah, this film had me in bits. You know, like you say, there's bits where it's quite light, but oh man, it's so sad at times as well. It's just, it's crazy. But yeah, and you can understand why he won the Oscar for Best Actor, because it's just a phenomenal performance. Yeah, it is a very, very good film. I haven't seen it for quite some time, but I've seen it a few times, and it's just great. Yeah, I can understand why you would put it right up there as one of the best. I did say that was your third choice, but it's actually your second choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry
I think that no, that's quite all right. It's as I say, I always think that when you describe it to people and you say, oh, it's like a stand-up comedian's take on the Holocaust, it sounds like the most bizarre thing you could ever say to describe this film, but that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. No, it's excellent. Very, very good choice.
So, your last choice of war films?
My last choice is the 2017 film Dunkirk from Christopher Nolan, which, again, it's one of these films that could have you in bits. It's quite a unique film in Nolan's catalogue because it's very short for a start. And the way that it's told in 3 different timescales. There's a week, which is, it's land, sea, and air are basically the elements of it. So land is 1 week, the story is told in. The sea is told in 1 day, and air is told in 1 hour. And I didn't pick up on this until about 3/4 of the way through watching it for the first time, that it was done in these different time periods, time scales. It's just, and when I did, it was just like, right, so that's why I've been hearing ticking all through the soundtrack. That's fine. I kind of get this now. Thank you very much. It's a typical Nolan film in that it's full of absolutely fantastic actors. You've got the likes of Fionn Whitehead, Jack Lowden, Harry Styles in one of his earlier performances. He's very good at it. And you've got the sort of more old hands like Mark Rylance, Cillian Murphy, Tom Hardy, and Barry Keoghan as well. And that, and he does very well, obviously. He's in the water sequence because he's in the boat with Cillian Murphy and Mark Rylance. Now, that's a thankless task when pitted up against those two in any situation, but he seems to hold his own. It's obviously the story of it is the evacuation of British troops from Dunkirk when the British Expeditionary Force had initially gone into Europe and basically get pushed back very, very quickly. And it's the operation that took place to try and get them back across the Channel. Now, the British Navy at the time were reluctant to send in their sort of heavier ships, which could more easily carry all the troops. You're talking about thousands and thousands of young men here, basically because if they failed and they get sunk by the Luftwaffe, who had control over the skies, then there would be no line of defence in the sea between France and Britain. So they had to withdraw, and it was all of these small boats, just basically civilians took boats across and everything. So that's one element of the story there. There's an element of the story with all the young soldiers actually stuck on the beach, and it focuses on a few of them and their attempts to try and get onto boats, like carrying an injured colleague onto the boat and then trying to stay on and get kicked off again and things like that. So there's all that going on, and it splits in between it. And then you've got the air stuff where you've got Tom Hardy with another face mask on during for most of it. And an interesting thing that I found out that the combat time of the Spitfires was only an hour because of the fuel limitations. So they basically got up there. They had an hour to actually do what we need to do in order to get back. So there's all of these elements that are seamlessly crafted together, and it just ratchets up the tension and the tension. It just gets more and more sort of somber. Just to make matters worse, you've got the Hans Zimmer score, which has elements of Nimrod in there as well. So, which is, I can tell you this now, that I'm seriously considering that as the music gets played at my funeral, because I want people to greet, and that's going to get people green. Yeah, it's one of these pieces of music. It just kind of gets me. It's just really good. But anyway, that's an aside. Hopefully, that's not going to be next week or anything. So,
but good that we've recorded it for posterity, just in case. Yeah.
But it's just this consummate film about war that is not about really the two sides of the conflict, because you very rarely see the difference in this. Is all about the efforts trying to get these people off of the beach and back to Britain, and the effect that this struggle has on the various people that are obviously involved in it. Obviously, you've got the likes of Kenneth Branagh's commander, who's trying to get people, organised for the boats and everything. So it's his struggle. It's all the young guys who are like, 17, 18, some of them. And they're basically petrified because they just see this advancing German army and there's very little they can do about it. And their backs are to the sea. And you see things like when one of the characters gets to the beach for the first time and he just looks across the beach and it's just these single lines of soldiers stretching the whole length of the beach. And you think, Jesus, it's just it really impacts the scale of the endeavour that's trying to happen. So even before you see the sort of armada of small boats heading for the coast, you know what the effort is that's going to actually do this. And it's just it's a consummate film, really. It just works so well. And it was kind of a bit of a left field choice, I thought, for Christopher Nolan, just based on the films he'd done previously. The scale of the films, this was a lot smaller, it was a lot tighter, but it works so well. Superb movie. Love it.
It is, I think, quite close to perfect as far as war films go. I always remember, because they used it in the trailer, remember that sort of overhead shot of all the soldiers lining up on the pier. And again, you just get that sense of like they're packed in, and they've all these really baby faces, and it emphasizes not only the sheer scale of the operation, but how young, these boys were essentially, that were willing to, put their life on the line. So in a similar vein, my last pick is the 2022 Edward Berger adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front, which obviously is based on Eric Maria Remarque's quite famous anti-war novel. So this is an interesting adaptation in that it, I believe, is the first one to be done in German. It stars Felix Kammerer, Albert Schuh, and Daniel Brühl. I watched this film on Netflix because, again, very limited, kind of similar pattern here, very limited cinematic release, and then it came to Netflix. and it sufficiently swept the board at the BAFTAs in particular. Again, I think as far as war films go, this is pretty much as close to perfect as you can get. You know, it starts off with these young sort of university boys who really are very, very young looking, being told that this is going to be like a big jolly, basically. You know, a couple of weeks at the front, you'll get all your meals, you get a brand new uniform, and sort of off you go. This will all be done and dusted. And then you sort of get the hints dropped where they get handed over their uniforms and they're slightly bloody, or they've got somebody else's name on them. And then obviously by the time they get to the front, the full sort of horrors are revealed. I mean, there's some really, really awful scenes in this film where, for example, you've got, you know, a dying soldier getting mud stuffed into his mouth to sort of kill him quicker. You've got tanks rolling over people. You've got young boys who are quite obviously what would then be referred to as shell-shocked, sitting covered in dust, you know, as their whole sort of trench closes in around them. It's one of these films that I feel like you can feel how cold and wet and miserable everything is. There's definitely no glamour here whatsoever. And I think, again, so this is not a soundtrack I would like to have played at my funeral because it made me jump out my skin. But it's a very, very effective score, and that there's long periods of silence, and then, like, for example, 3 quick blasts of a horn, and that's you sort of jumped out your skin and you're back into the action. I think it's, you know, if there's a film that's ever really sort of captured the essence of the book, I think it's definitely this, you know. And also the fact that the film really picks up on how boring periods of war can be, because there's times where they're just sitting about on farms, basically just farting about because there's absolutely nothing to do. And the book really captures how boring that can be as well. So I felt it really, really was true to the source, as it were, and just fantastic performances. Really quite frightening, actually, to the extent where some of it almost feels like a horror film because you can't quite believe what you're seeing. And yeah, just brilliant performances, brilliant score, just, yeah, pretty much up there with really, really fantastic contemporary films in general, never mind contemporary sort of genre films.
Yeah, you're right. It was absolutely fantastic film. It does, like you say, it does not glamorize any aspect of it. The mundanity of sitting about with nothing to do, just waiting to go back to the front, is something that I have come across in the past. There was the Peter Jackson documentary, the one that he did when he restored all the footage. There was talk in that about the British soldiers who were exactly the same. They would go to the front, they would fight there for a couple of weeks, and then they'd be pulled back, and another unit would go in, and they would just be sitting about, you know, not doing anything. It was just, you know, sort of what they call it, the quiet before the storm, I suppose. And the incredible toll that took on people. So yeah, in a way, this is a horror film, very much so. You're right in that respect, because that's, you know, war is hell. That's something that you've heard over and over again, and this reinforces it. There's no glamour to it. There's no elements of this where you've got a character who's having a good time shooting bad guys. You know,
nobody's having a good time in that film.
No, there's nothing positive in the story, but obviously it's a very well told story. So yes, it's a fantastic choice. Really, really good. Yeah. So apart from that, what did you have any other honourable mentions, stuff that you maybe considered?
Oh gosh, there was things like The Last Days of Sophie Scholl, which I absolutely love, the German language film about the White Rose movement as well. There was Joyeux Noël, which is actually a Christmas film about when the soldiers came together and played football. Again, a sort of like host of really well-known sort of German, British and sort of different French names in that as well, which is quite a good one. Obviously, I mean, as I say, Downfall will always be my go-to, but we've discussed that at length before. So that's just off the top of my head, one of the sort of ones I love the most. I think that the more I sort of watch these type of films, the more I'm sort of drawn to things like, you know, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is distinctly unglamorous, as we've said. It's very much about the sort of the horrors of it. And I think that's the kind of film that I like my war films serious, I guess, is the thing. Yes. What about you? Did you have a short list?
I had a few. Obviously, I thought about The Dirty Dozen, because there's obvious parallels between that and the Ministry film. Again, it's almost like a light-hearted, not light-hearted, but it's more of an action-focused take on There's very much, even they're good guys, and they're all basically nutters, and they've been taken away from death row in order to do a job. And again, that is elements that link it to Inglourious Bastards as well. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there was obviously loads of films like Sansevino Giuma. They were expendable. It's all sorts of 40s and 50s, even sort of stretching into the 60s. There was films where it was straightforward action war films where the Allies were the good guys and the Germans or the Japanese or the Italians were the bad guys. And they've been done to a certain extent in every sort of theatre of war. You've got, Where Eagles Dare and all that as well. So there's multitudes on them, but they are all focused on good guys and bad guys, and the outcomes are, and that's very much a sort of studio thing as well. They don't want sympathetic antagonists. Your antagonists are the people that you boo, and it's very, very much like pantomime, I suppose, in that respect.
Yeah.
Which it shouldn't be when you're talking about a situation that hundreds of thousands of people died in. It should be taken seriously, and that's why there has been almost like a reinterpretation of the war film over the last 20 years. It's more European than Hollywood, but even Hollywood has those sort of elements as well. So yeah, there's a multitude of them, but I thought I would go for something that kind of resonated with me more than direct. I mean, if you look at my choices, none of them have really got any direct wartime action in them. It's all about the people and the situations behind the scenes. Obviously, Dunkirk, it's the evacuation. Run Silent, Run Deep is the tensions within the submarine, and Colonel Blimp is a friendship and a love story over the course of 40 years. So they've all got war in common, but they don't actually ultimately focus on war. So yeah, it's a different way to try and look at it as well. So aye.
Yeah, I definitely think, though, that the sort of, I would say the prominence maybe of more European films have impacted the way that even like British films have taken on, as you say, sort of a reinterpretation of the war film. Because I was even thinking of, do you remember that film? Was it Valkyrie?
Yes, yeah.
That was quite an interesting film as well. I quite like that. There was the film Good with Viggo Mortensen. About the guy who's essentially conflicted about putting on his Nazi uniform, which is a cracking film as well. I definitely think that war films now have more shades of grey, as you say, as opposed to sort of pantomime baddies, as it were. Yeah,
it's more interesting stories. It's kind of the stories that people want to hear and see now as well. So it's just reflecting changing attitudes towards it. It's got something to do with the fact that we haven't had a major world war for 70 years. I know it's going to. I know the third one's going to happen any day now, but at this moment, at the time of recording, we haven't entered the third world war yet.
People will find this in a sort of fallout sort of tunnel at some point, and they'll be like, "God, they were wrong about that." So that just about wraps up another episode of the Moviescramble podcast. If you want to find us on socials, all the usual places, it's at Moviescramble. And if you want to slide into John's inbox, it is podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. But until next time, that is everything from us. Bye.
Bye.